Hey guys, how you doing? This is JP Saricolia. Welcome again to another episode of Age of Heroes, my podcast. This is episode number 40. And thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. This podcast has been growing. It's becoming popular. It's not super popular, but people listen to it, through the different apps, which I'm very grateful. I'm thankful that you take the time to listen to it, throughout your day, whatever, we can connect. I really appreciate that. It's my opportunity that I have to come to you and, have these conversations day in, day out. Of course, it's a conversation that comes from me. Of course, you don't talk to me. We don't have that communication. And that's why it's so important that you leave your comments and you can always connect with me. You can go through my page. You can send me a message on my Facebook page. If you want to talk, you can just post on my videos, even on my Instagram. I'm always there to listen through all the different, or even Twitter. You can connect to me with me through Twitter. So, today I want to talk about something that really, yesterday there was not much really to talk about. There was a lot of stuff in the media, a lot of news, all that. Nothing that really, I would say, blew my mind to say, hey, I need to talk about it, tomorrow morning. But one thing that struck me, I was going through everything. Of course, yesterday I talked about the awards, about my feelings in regards to Black Panther, and some of the movies that won on the Golden Globes, and some of the movies that I felt personally I felt that they deserved to win, didn't win, and so on and so on. But of course, going through all the notes of the day and going through other subjects and, other things, and going through social media and going through Facebook, and of course, there's always conversations about it. And, people always agree, people always disagree. And last night I was watching videos. I would normally like to watch different videos just, to entertain myself a little bit. So I was watching videos of top 10 comic book stories, top 10 this and top 10 that. And, I was going through the notes. I always like to read the comments. Sometimes you find very funny comments. The best part of sometimes of some of the posts, of some of the viral posts, it's those posts people on media, social media like Facebook, that are very contended. People that talk about things that, are going to spark some reaction. There's always going to be these two groups, divided groups. And people tend to be very clever. Sometimes you really laugh. It makes me laugh how people can be very combative and how people can, sometimes they have some really smart comebacks. And there's always some a-holes, some people that they're very smart in the way they say things, and they instigate others, and it's just funny. It's the craziness of social media. And, I could say I'm guilty as charged. Sometimes I like to, to push people to the edge, and, I've been there. It's something that we all do one way or another. And, it's just kind of fun. It's not necessarily good because you might consider that bullying, but it's just the way it is. It's the social media that we live in, is that the world we live in nowadays it's a totally different world from 10 years ago, from 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But I was going through the list and I realized one thing, and I want to talk about it today about this, and I want to get into it. Art is subjective, and I'm going to go to just talking about art because this is the main focus of my channel. It's about comic books, movies, and anything, video games, anything that has to do with art and entertainment. With this channel. Art is subjective. No matter what, you're never going to find two people to agree about art. It's just the bottom line. And the same happens when I'm going through this list that a lot of these websites create about top 10 stories of all time, Batman stories or DC stories. I realize that, no matter what the list they put on, you might agree with some of the in this case, the stories on the list. Most of those stories, I'm not going to agree. I just don't like them. And the thing is this, other people might disagree with me and other people might disagree with them. So ultimately, nobody agrees. Everyone has a different view. That's the beauty of art, to be honest. Yes, it is crazy that sometimes it really creates some of these heated conversations between Marvel fans or DC fans and whoever. But bottom line is the art is subjective. There's a lot of stories that I personally do not like and people love to death. For example, I'm going to use some examples here. I think, for example, Batman Returns, The Dark Knight Returns, I think it's an overrated story. I've always thought about it. In my mind, I read it when I was young. I never was crazy about it. I've never been crazy. I understand the story. I love Frank Miller, but I don't consider him the best Frank Miller story or the best Batman story. But a lot of people disagree, and, people loved it, and they will defend it to that. I personally love Watchmen. I consider Watchmen the best DC story of all times. That's my opinion. Other people disagree. I just love Watchmen. You probably have watched my video. One of my most popular videos, of course, is the Watchmen review, the absolute version, in my YouTube channel. I love Watchmen. If you want to know my feelings about it, you can watch the video, and definitely I go in depth about it. I really loved it. I like V for Vendetta. I don't consider the best, but I consider good book. The Killing Joke, I think it's overrated. Oh, people love it. People love it. And I don't think it's overrated. I've always thought about that. That doesn't change my mind. I mean, like people talk about the All-Star Superman as one of the greatest or the best Superman story. I totally disagree. I don't consider All-Star Superman the best Superman story. I like it. It's good. It has its moments, but I don't consider Morrison the best writer in the world. I think he's overrated. That's just my opinion. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me in here, and that's okay because art is subjective. And, when some people consider some stories better than others, sometimes, it's just more about what people tell you, hey, this is great, and read it. To really know what's good, you would have to have read 75 years of history in comics. What we're talking about, in this case, DC Comics, to really have a clear picture of all the stories that have been written. And I know some people love to read. A lot of people have all the time to read, and I've read so many stories that you wouldn't believe. I have read almost, I wouldn't say the entire DC, but I've been close to it. But reading, close to it, and, probably like still 30 years, still behind. But, I read a lot of stories. To really come with a objective answer, you would have to read every single story to really know what's best and what works and what doesn't. But even though you might read it all, every person and every experience matters because ultimately it's all about we romanticize, we have a romantic view of what we grew up reading. We all do. To me, growing up in the 80s, I grew up in Mexico, so I have the opportunity to read comics in Spanish and comics in English, because there's a connection, we get a lot of English comics too in Mexico when I was a kid in the 80s. But in the Spanish comics, the ones that were translated from Marvel or DC, there were comics from the 70s. So we were reading in the 80s comics from the 70s in Spanish in Mexico. But we also were reading American comics. And so we were kind of like, you were reading this, they were probably years ahead, the American, the US. So I was blessed with that connection. I was able to read things from, different generation and things that were newer, for the generation that I was living in. But, going through all those comics, going through all those comics really help out, to really have a broader view of things and really know more about the stories and really enjoy them and the 80s and the 90s and so on, through all the generations. But I have a romantic view of comics from the era that I grew up. I grew up reading for Marvel, John Byrne. I grew up reading his comics. I grew up reading, a lot of 80s stuff from Batman, for Superman. So to me, that's I have a romantic view of that era. So if you're going to ask me what I consider the best, even the 90s, early 90s, to me, the Death and the Return of Superman, it really has a whole. It really, or even the Nightfall series for Batman, it really are important to me. And you have to compare it to other newer Morrison stuff. I don't care about Morrison stuff. I've read it, Batman and Son, but I don't consider them better than, Nightfall. Yes, when I read Nightfall, I can realize all the shortcomings of the 90s. But to me, I see it in a nostalgic view. I have a romantic view of it. And nostalgia plays a big part of it. Sometimes the first story you read, it really changes the way you see comics. Now, like I said before with Watchmen, I read Watchmen when I was a teenager. I didn't hold any value to me. I didn't care about Watchmen at all. It wasn't until I got a bit older when I read it again that really changed my point of view. It changed my mind. But of course, you're talking about a person that, I was older, and I already went through through my studies and all that, and I was reading more in-depth books, and books that were a little more mature in level. So then I realized that actually Watchmen had a lot of maturity in it. It's not a perfect book, but it had a lot of maturity, and the way it was, the context of the story, but also the way it was designed, really makes a lot of sense. It is a great job, that was put together by the people involved in it. So yeah, in my opinion, it's one a great movie. Now, a lot of people are going to disagree with me. A lot of people are not going to say they don't like Watchmen. And that's okay, because again, art is subjective. That goes with movies. You're always going to have the DC fans and the Marvel fans, and people are going to disagree. Like I was talking about what I considered like Black Panther a better movie. A lot of people are disagreeing. A lot of people are going to disagree with me. A lot of people don't like Black Panther, and that's okay because art is subjective. Now, we have to have an open mind when we come to read something so we can compare it. And that's when I do, even with my reviews. When I sit down and I review my stuff, I review a lot of stuff that I love. But when I look at it after so many years, then you realize that some people some things don't age well, and it's okay. When we are older, then we can come to see things from a different perspective, and then we have a better understanding of what we're doing. What I'm trying to tell you this is here today. No matter what people think, and no matter what people say, ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to make up your mind in regards to what you like and what you don't like. Yes, go through the list, read all the lists and go through all of that. I always tell that to people. If you need to know what's the better Batman stories, I have a video where I talk about what are the best Batman stories, in my opinion. Go through all of them. But ultimately, you make up your mind. Ultimately, you're the one that has to make the choice. Read the stories with an open mind. You agree with me, you agree with me. If you don't, it's fine. Don't agree with me. Just make a choice. Look for the stories. There are plenty of stories. When we talk about stories nowadays in comics books are so rich, so full of stories, such a great, opportunities to get there. I have read so many stories in my life. I have heard a lot of great things from them, and, they didn't pan out. They were flat to me. But I have just chosen to read some stories that I didn't care much about it and really changed my point of view, changed my mind and my appreciation of that story, of that character. Always be open to change. That's the important thing. If you think that Morrison is the best writer in the world, then by all means, just keep believing that. It's up to you. It's what you like. If that inspires you, he inspires you, go ahead. But don't be blinded by just, what, in this case, your personal perception or your nostalgia does. Maybe because you have grown reading Grant Morrison and you love what he does. Open your mind, open your mind to try something different. See it from one different perspective. You might not like it, but you always have to read every story. You have to understand the context of the story. That's important that you get into the comic with an open mind, and understand the context. If you're going to read some things from a different era, you realize that there are certain rules in different eras, that, they have no control, no bearing today. In certain things. For example, if you're reading comics from the era of the comic book authority, the code of authority, then you have to know that there's a couple of things that you're not going to see in those comic book stories. And that's just because that's the way it is. So you have to see, you have to read between the lines, in the stories. Now, nowadays, the code authority is no longer here to determine certain things. So writers have more liberty to express certain things. But that's the beauty of some of the older comic book stories. Because of that limitation, writers became and artists were very clever in trying to put the information or try to bring the stories in there and trying to give as much richness to the stories with the limitations they have. Nowadays, of course, writers, they pretty much, they do whatever they can do because they're allowed to do it. So, also, gives them permission for lazy writing. That's just my opinion and based on my experience. So, you always have to be open to every story. There are a lot of richness in comic book stories. there's a lot of richness in it, and there's a lot of great stories that you can actually really enjoy. Be open. Be open to the movies. Going back to that. Even with movies, a lot of people hate Star Wars because it has become the most popular thing is to hate. The last episode, the last Jedi. A lot of people hate it with their older guts, and you can see people hating it. The movie's been a year gone, and they see people hating it, and they just expressing their hate everywhere they go. Just let it go. Just be open. You didn't like it. You didn't like it. By all means, don't like it. Hate it. But, just calm yourself down. You ain't going to change the world. It ain't going to make anything better. All you're doing is just hurting the franchise even more by just spreading your hate all over the internet. Just watch it with an open mind and take the best and just reject the worst. And, if you do it that way, you will enjoy everything you do, whether it's reading comics, watching movies, watching cartoons, playing video games, because the hate is real out there. People, they just find ways just to be unhappy no matter what. And, to me, it's all about happiness. I enjoy the movies. I review them. Sometimes I don't like them as much, but I realize that at the end of the day, it's just entertainment. And just because a movie is not a 10 doesn't mean that it's garbage. Just because a movie, is not well received by everybody doesn't mean that I'm going to go with them, going to follow the sheep mentality. I'm just going to feel the same way. I'm going to make up my own mind. Sorry for all the coughing. I'm getting out of this illness. I've been mentioning this in my past podcast. So I'm getting better. So I'm glad. I'll be better in a couple of days. But what do you think? What is your opinion about this? I'm sure, again, art is subjective. Inspires people. It does something for some. It doesn't do anything for others. It just, and at the end of the day, it's just your perception. And what really matters is not what other people think, it's what you think and, what your experience tells you. So just allow your experience to kind of guide you through everything. And believe me, you'll have a better time and you'll enjoy everything you do. You'll have fun. I have fun. I went to, I watched the Last Jedi and I have fun with it. Yes, it's not a perfect film, but I have fun, and, people were hating it and people still hating it and people throwing shade on it. But you know what? So be it. They want to be unhappy. I'm happy. I can still go back and watch, The Last Hope, and I can watch the original trilogy, and I still have fun with it because I collect them, I still have them, and I enjoy them whenever I feel like it. And I read the comics, I don't think, even the comics that I don't like, I have them, I collect them, I read them once in a while. And sometimes, after I read a couple of times, I realize that, hey, wait a minute. I didn't notice this. Now I can understand it better. With life comes maturity, and with maturity also a better understanding of things. And sometimes we need to rewatch things, or we need to reread things until something clicks, and then we realize that we were wrong all along. You never know. The world changes that way. So what do you think? I would like to hear your thoughts. Maybe you feel the same way I do. Maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you don't like what I like, or maybe you don't like what I dislike. I don't know. Everyone is free to have an opinion. So I would like to hear it. So once again, thanks for listening to the podcast. Please stay tuned. I'm in the middle right now of my 2 weeks notice. This is my first week. Next week is my last week. And after that, I'm on unemployment. So that means that I'm going to be dedicating too much time really a lot of time to this podcast and this channel. So you're going to see a lot of changes in the format, the videos, all kind of stuff. I'm going to do more reviews. So stay tuned, and I thank you. Thank you for your support. Please consider supporting this channel. You do it by watching, by listening, by liking, by subscribing, by sharing the videos or the podcast, but also consider about helping this vision financially. You can do that to my Patreon account. Anything you can do, even if it's just $1 a month, whatever you can do will help this channel out. So once again, God bless you. I'll talk to you again. Bye-bye.